Hello whisky fans, and welcome to another review of another Lidl Bracken supermarket mystery malt. So this one is going to be the last of this trio. It's another one from 2015, so not available directly from Lidl anymore, but there's a good chance that if you do some digging you might find one of these at auction somewhere. So the box and label on this one are going to be very similar to the 22-year-old Islay single malt. As with the 22-year-old Islay, this is a vintaged whisky, so distilled in 1987, bottled in 2015, 28 years old, chill filtered, matured in oak casks. We don't know what distillery it's from, but again produced and bottled by the Clydesdale Scotch Whisky Company, so White and Mackay. So with this one, as with any Speyside mystery malt, it's always a little bit harder to guess where they're from. We're always very privileged with Islay that there's less than 10 distilleries on Islay, whether you count the ones that aren't active and running yet or not. With Speyside is the most populated region of Scotch whisky production, and as with the Islay bottling, there's a little map on the inside of the door on the box, and this time, rather unhelpfully, the cryptic circle on the map highlights basically the Speyside region. So there are literally dozens of distilleries either in or close to that circle, because it goes around that area, sort of between Elgin and Banff. So literally dozens of distilleries in there, and that's assuming that the distillery that this whisky's from is even from somewhere inside that circle. What I will say is that when this whisky was released in 2015, there were murmurs on the internet that people thought this whisky was from Tamnavulin, and I'd say that's probably a pretty good guess, based on the fact that Tamnavulin is a distillery with a reasonably large output capacity, and it's usually very available to independent bottlers and blenders, and just the distillery profile of Tamnavulin, it's quite often got that classic Speyside character. It ages quite well. It's usually very nice at a higher age. I'd say that this could very well be Tamnavulin. One more last thing about presentation and appearance before we get on with the nosing and tasting. The colour of this one, again, it doesn't say with colouring or without on the label or box, but I have just realised that this one's actually a shade lighter than the 22-year-old Islay that was released at the same time. So from that you could take it as they are natural colour, but that's not natural colour for a 22-year-old whisky of that style. But the fact that they're different colour, perhaps this one is natural colour, because that does seem a lot more like what you would expect to see from a 28-year-old Speyside, perhaps. So let's get some in a glass and see what we've got. Must admit that when I bought this 28-year-old Speyside mystery malt from Lidl 6 years ago, I wasn't originally intending to buy it. The one that I was really excited about was the 22-year-old Islay, because I've always loved my Islay Scotch. And when I saw that this one was on the shelf for an extra £5 on top of the price of the Islay, it's kind of a little impulse decision that I'll pick this one up as well and see what it's about. So the nose of this 28-year-old Speyside, the first thing that leaps out to me that is it's hugely toffeed, getting lots of notes of toffee and stewed fruits, apples like roasted apple. Also lots of milk chocolate notes. Lots of old malt, to be honest, and you can tell that this one is older than the 22-year-old Islay. Aside from the heavy toffee notes, it is quite a light nose. There's a little bit of grassy citrus and a little hint of unripe citrus fruits, unripe oranges on the nose perhaps. Getting a little hint of cider apples and a little sort of effervescent hint of refresher sweets. is definitely, aside from the fact that you can tell this is very old, there's quite a lot of fruit on the nose. Lots of stewed fruit, apple, gooseberry. It's also mildly spicy, and I'm going to say slightly smoky as well. And I don't mean smoky as in a peat smoke. Just a very faint smokiness, perhaps coming from the cask. And there's also a little hint of a farmy smokiness in there as well. So right away, just from the amount of different aromas that I've picked out on the nose there, that's a really nice and complex nose. So already very happy with this one. Let's see how it tastes. So again, on the palate, I do think that the palate is not quite as complex as the nose on this one. But again, there's lots of notes of toffee and caramel, vanilla and honey, lots of notes that you get from a bourbon cask. It's very rounded on the palate and a little bit mild. And I think, as I always say with these whiskies, bottled at 40%, it's down to the low bottling strength. I think that a little bit more ABV would have really made this something special. Again, I'm getting some orangey notes on the palate of this one, and a little bit of weak smoke, which intertwines really nicely, really well integrated with that creamy, vanilla, oily nuttiness that you get on the palate. Other flavours that I'm getting on the palate, I'm getting some mild oak spices, which you'd probably expect for something that's been in an oak cask for nearly 3 decades. And there's also, this isn't something that I've ever eaten or ever consumed, but there's a note in there of fresh pipe tobacco, the stuff that I assume some people probably still do, that you can buy in tins and you break it up and stick in your pipe for smoking. I've never smoked, but I've known a few people who have smoked pipes, and I've always thought that when they get that fresh tobacco when they're breaking it up, you do get wonderful aromas coming off the tobacco, and I'm getting some of those aromas in this whiskey. And another thing that I'm getting very late on the palate of this whiskey is a strong note of like a strong milky coffee, like a latte coffee made with a double shot of espresso, something like that. So again, on the palate, not quite as complex as the nose, but it's reasonably full, isn't too underpowered, and it's very nice. As for the finish, it's fairly long, despite the low ABV, probably a little bit longer than the 22-year-old Isla that I've just tried, with some really nice notes of stewed fruits, toffee, and a little bit of spice. I think the thing that I struggle most with this whiskey is the fact that it is a 28-year-old single malt, because that really makes me want to judge it a little bit more harshly, because a 22-year-old Scotch should be something really special. And this one, because it's a supermarket mystery malt, and because the ABV has been dropped right down, I think especially with this 28-year-old Speyside, the low ABV really hurts it a lot more than the other two. And that's not to say that it's worse, because I actually think this one is better than the other two, but I think that the drop in ABV with this one has turned it from probably something in the A category down to something in the Bs. So even then, gave this one a C, this one a C+, going to give this one a B. So that's a really good grade, but for the age that it is, it should have been better. And I think it could have been better at a higher ABV. It's certainly well aged, and it's incredibly pleasant without any real flaws. It just could have been so much more. So out of the 3, like I said, C, C+, B. If you have all of these available for around the same price, definitely go for this one. Probably give this one a miss unless it literally is the same price as that. But generally, I think the one to look out for on the auction sites, if you see any of these, is going to be the 28-year-old Speyside. Especially if you're the sort of person that doesn't mind a whiskey that is a slightly lower strength, if that's palatable to you. And especially if you're a fan of that classic, well-aged Speyside style. So, I think that's about all I can say about these Lidl mystery malts. I think that's enough supermarket whiskey for a little while. I promise it'll be something different next time. But thanks for watching, and if you've tried any of these whiskies, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.